SNAP benefits might soon be harder to use and easier to lose. From new food bans to major funding changes, what's happening right now could change the future of food assistance across the United States. And wait, if you think that you've heard all of this before, please just hang on because this is actually new information today. I know we had a lot of major updates about SNAP last week, but since then things have continued to escalate. 2 more states have joined the ban wave. The USDA is now inviting every governor in the country to submit their idea of what SNAP should look like. And that's just the beginning of today's update. We have a lot more to cover beyond that as well. So as we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. The federal government is giving the states more and more control over SNAP benefits recently. So I want to know, do you trust your state to protect your benefits? Do you think they're going to be able to handle all this fairly? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments and let me know what you think. And now let's dive in. We're going to start with the updates coming out of Indiana and Iowa, the 2 newest states to get USDA approval for SNAP food bans. These bans will officially take effect on January 1st of 2026, but they've already stirred up a lot of controversy. Indiana's restriction is fairly straightforward. They're cutting out soft drinks and candy from what you can buy with SNAP. Now, whether or not you think that's fair, at least it's easy to understand. Iowa, on the other hand, is a whole different story. Iowa isn't banning foods based on nutrition or public health. They're banning foods based on sales tax rules, which means SNAP users in Iowa will only be allowed to buy foods that the state doesn't charge sales tax on. Sounds logical in theory, right? But here's where it gets messy. That means that you can still buy eggs, milk, fresh fruits, veggies, that sort of thing, and that's great. But you can also still buy things like ice cream and potato chips, but some healthy foods like trail mix, granola bars, and fruit strips will now be off limits because those are taxed in Iowa. Not because they're bad for you, just because of how the state classifies them. And to make matters worse, some sources say Iowans won't even be able to use SNAP to buy seeds or produce-bearing plants anymore, and that's a huge hit to people who rely on gardening to stretch their SNAP food budget. So while Iowa's rule might sound nutrition-friendly at first, it could actually block people from accessing affordable, healthy options. And honestly, it's just plain confusing. I could see this leading to a lot of chaos at the cash register, especially for out-of-state shoppers. And here's the kicker. This isn't an isolated move. In a press release dated May 22nd, the USDA openly called on every governor in the country to submit requests for similar waivers. Every single one. This is a clear signal that the federal government is not only allowing these state-specific bans, they are encouraging them. They want this. And that could lead to a confusing patchwork of rules all across the country. So if you're thinking, good thing I don't live in Indiana or Iowa right now, please don't get too comfortable because your state could be next. And honestly, it could get even worse. I know we talked last week about how there's a proposal floating around that would make states pay for a portion of SNAP food benefits, costs that right now the federal government covers completely. And I know that sounds like a technical change, but I need you to understand how important this is. Since SNAP started in its current form nearly 50 years ago, states have only paid to administer the program. The food itself has always been federally funded. But if this cost-sharing plan goes through, states would have to start chipping in, and that opens a huge can of worms. Let's walk through what that could actually look like. Right now, if your household qualifies for SNAP, you get benefits based on your income and household size according to the same chart that's used everywhere, no matter where you live. But if your state suddenly has to come up with, say, 10% of those costs, that money has to come from somewhere. And most states don't have that kind of money just lying around. In fact, last year, tax revenue dropped in 40 states. A lot of states are already dealing with budget shortfalls, and if they have to choose between funding SNAP or funding schools or roads or healthcare, well, you know what happens next. Just look at Nevada or New Mexico, for example. Each one of those states receives about $1 billion a year in SNAP funding from the federal government. Under this new plan, they'd have to come up with $100 million a year to keep those benefits flowing. And if they can't, benefits could be cut. I think the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities did a great job of breaking this down in a way that was really easy to understand. So I want to review what they had to say about this. According to their calculations, if you take a state like Nevada or New Mexico that's receiving $1 billion in federal funding for SNAP, they're going to have to pay a tenth of that. So that's $100 million, right? And it looks like the federal government is saving that money. So right away, it looks like the federal government is winning. But what if the state can't pay that? What if they can only pay, say, $75 million? Well, because of the way that the match works, that's going to reduce how much the federal government pays into $750 million. Right? And suddenly families in that state are taking a 25% cut. Either they're going to cut 1 in 4 people off of SNAP completely, or they're going to reduce all the SNAP payouts from the average of $6.40 per person per day to 25% less, which would be around $4.80 per day. And the CBPP says that under a benefit cut like this, the average household would lose more than $1,000 a year in food assistance benefits. That is huge. That is a huge impact for real people. And this isn't just going to affect big states either. Iowa would have had to pay $53 million last year. Kansas, $41 million. These aren't small numbers. In some cases, states would have to choose between funding SNAP or laying off hundreds of teachers, closing programs, or gutting other essential services that they're obligated to pay for. And if that doesn't make your stomach turn, remember, states with the highest poverty rates are going to be the ones that would be hit the hardest here. And it just makes sense, right? Because they're going to have a harder time covering these new costs. This shift isn't just about dollars, it's about control. And honestly, it feels like it's a little bit about illusion too. Sure, the federal government might save some money, and they can honestly say that they aren't cutting anyone from SNAP. But the outcome is going to be the same. The states are going to suffer, and people are going to lose their benefits. And it's all just semantics on paper. So yeah, things are moving fast, and they're moving in a direction that could make SNAP both harder to access and harder to use, and a lot less reliable for the families who need it the most. But before I wrap up here, there is a little bit of good news, at least. The USDA has announced a $67 million food purchase to support nutrition programs and food banks across the country. They're buying things like Atlantic groundfish, canned pears, beans, cherries, and shrimp from U.S. producers and then distributing those to communities in need. It's a helpful move, but it's not enough to offset everything else that's happening right now. And in USDA Leadership news, Patrick Penn has just been appointed as Deputy Undersecretary for the Food and Nutrition Service. That's the organization that manages SNAP. He grew up in foster care, served in the military, and worked as a state legislator pushing for social service reforms. So we'll be watching closely to see what kind of changes he brings to the table. I expect we're going to see more of the same sort of changes that we've seen rolling out recently. So, what do you think? Is this the direction that SNAP should be heading? Should your state have more power over your benefits, or do you think we need to keep things consistent and fair across the board? Let me know in the comments. And of course, check out our other videos for more ways to save money and get free stuff.